Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we're so happy to have you join us today. You're going to hear from some of the up-and-coming thought leaders and influencers. And we're very happy to introduce you to Peyton Lofton, checking in from Washington, D.C. today. Peyton, I know you're a Young Voices contributor, but I'd love it if you tell us just a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Brian. So my name is Peyton. I am a policy analyst at a centrist think tank here in D.C. called the New Center. I'm originally from New Orleans, and I work on a variety of policy areas, but right now I'm most interested in education reform, so charter schools and the broader school choice movement.
I'm looking at an article that you wrote for the Florida Sun Sentinel, or is it the Orlando Sun Sentinel? Anyways, I realize education is becoming kind of a battleground for a lot of the elections that are taking place. In fact, last year, didn't we see education and education choice have a pretty direct impact in the Virginia race, which saw Governor Youngkin elected? Talk to me about the state of Florida and what's happening in their gubernatorial race that shows that public schools are still pretty much a battleground for these elections.
Yeah, what's happening in Florida is Democrats still have not learned their lesson from Virginia on education. The Democratic nominee for governor, Charlie Crist, appointed a teachers union boss named Carla Hernandez-Matz to be his running mate for lieutenant governor. Hernandez-Matz, she is the president of the Miami-Dade Teachers Union. She is a vice president of the American Federation of Teachers. This pick really indicates that Crist wants to make this race about education, which is just a losing issue for Democrats, especially in Florida, especially in this period that we're in right now. Parents have kind of had enough of these anti-parent, anti-choice, anti-transparency policies, the type of policies that Hernandez-Matz is pushing for. She's fought against expanding the tax credit scholarships in Florida. She's called to fully defund Florida's charter schools. She fought to keep schools closed during the pandemic, even though we knew at the time there was limited risk for spreading COVID. And now we're looking at the results from the nation's report card, and we're seeing just how harmful those school closures were for students. We lost about 2 decades of academic progress. So Carla Hernandez-Matz, she is a slap in the face to Florida parents, and I think Charlie Crist is going to pay for that at the polls in November. Let's
walk back to about a year ago, when this same kind of event was playing out in Virginia. And I believe that, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, was it Terry McAuliffe who was running against
Terry
Youngkin?
McAuliffe is correct.
Okay. Came right out and said, that parents, this is not your place. You leave education to the experts, essentially. And boy, did it backfire in a big way. Talk to us about what happened there and what Democrats in Florida could learn if they were willing to look at that situation and see what happens when you tell parents, hey, stay in your lane.
Yeah, just like you said, Terry McAuliffe told parents they had no business deciding what happens in schools. They have no business, picking a school for their kids. Terry McAuliffe actually had the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, which is Carla Hernandez-Matz's president. McAuliffe had Randy Weingarten come stump for him the night before election, really put all of his eggs in the teachers union basket and paid the price for it. Virginia flipped to Republican governor for the first time in a while. And that, Virginia was leading a little bit blue at that point, but it is a, purple battleground state with a Democratic advantage. And, Florida is kind of on the other side, the Republican advantage of a battleground state. So if the teachers unions didn't help in Virginia, they're definitely not going to help in Florida.
Well, it sounds like Florida is not only in the headlines for, these midterm elections, but it sounds like Florida could actually be kind of a key player in the 2024 elections, thanks to Governor DeSantis. I'm not trying to pronounce him the heir apparent to what Trump was hoping to do in 2024, but the guy looks like a pretty viable leader, compared to some of the choices out there. And of course, this is who Charlie Crist is running against, right? He's running against DeSantis.
That's right. DeSantis is his opponent running for re-election in November in Florida. And with the pick, I mean, frankly, with the pick of Carla Hernandez-Metz, it now looks all but certain that Ron DeSantis is going to win the election. He's certainly going to win the education vote. Just recently, the Florida primaries, Florida school choice elections happened. Ron DeSantis got involved in 30 of those races, and 25 of his picks actually ended up winning. And this includes school boards in very blue, very progressive parts of the state. So Ron DeSantis's education message is hitting, even in these Democratic strongholds. Charlie Crist continued to ignore the warning signs, make this fight about education, which he's going to lose, and he'll lose the governor's mansion because of it.
So I have to ask, by choosing this teachers union representative, my wife is a public school teacher, but she has avoided joining any of the teachers unions because she has some pretty deeply held objections to some of the things that these teachers unions stand for. Now, without me telling you what those are, I'm curious, just from your vantage point, Peyton, why is it that, if Florida voters were to perceive that, well, wait a minute, this Charlie Crist is just asking a teachers union rep or someone who's representative of that part of the education establishment, what are some of the objections they have to someone in that position as, lieutenant governor?
Sure. Brian, thanks for bringing up your wife. It's because it's really not the individual teachers that are at fault here. It's really the leadership of the teachers unions, very political, very highly politicizing these education issues. Time and time again, we're seeing it in Florida and we're seeing it at the national level. They're opposing charter schools, which are, proven to work for even the most disadvantaged students. They're opposing private school vouchers and tax credit scholarships and things that make it easier to homeschool. They're opposing pretty much any semblance of choice because teachers unions currently right now, or in most places, have a monopoly on public education. It benefits them greatly when they don't have any competitors and they don't have any consequences for doing a poor job. And so they're trying to protect their monopoly. From a personal standpoint, I get it. But from a political standpoint, there's a lot more at stake than, protecting your job and protecting your paycheck. We really want to get the best schools and the best education possible for our students. And I think that's way more important than politics. So
is it too late for Charlie Crist to unmake this decision? I mean, has he made his bed and now he gets to lie down in it?
Yeah, you can't come back from this. You can't announce a running mate and then give in to pressure and drop her. I can hope, I can dream that, Carla Hernandez-Metz will announce that she's seen the light and she's come back from her ways and now supports choice, but that clearly won't happen. What I'm hoping is that this will be a warning sign. I hoped Virginia would be a warning sign, but now maybe it'll take another shot. And we're actually, we might even be seeing a changing tide. Josh Shapiro is running for governor in Pennsylvania, and he's a Democrat. And it came out just earlier this week that he maybe supports private school choice. He made like a stealth edit to his campaign website in support of a voucher program that they have up in Pennsylvania. And so, maybe this is a sign that Democrats are learning their lesson, but I'm not going to hold my breath just yet.
Well, that's actually pretty good news, and not necessarily from the standpoint of because it's going to give the Democrats an advantage, but at least it would show that they're starting to listen to some of the parents. And it sounds like school choice is definitely a winning issue with a lot of parents, maybe thanks to the last couple of years.
Exactly. And like you said, it's not about Democrats winning. It's not about Republicans winning. I don't care which party is the one pushing these policies, as long as we're getting the right schools, the right programs for the students that need it most. It happens right now that's a very politically viable strategy and it's a winning strategy. And, in the past couple of years, you've seen Republicans really take advantage of that. And I think Democrats are going to be forced to do the same just because they see where the polls are and they see where the votes are.
Okay. Are there any other states you're keeping an eye on where education is kind of a crucial flashpoint in their upcoming elections?
Well, sure. We saw in Arizona earlier this summer, they passed the gold standard of school choice policies, as the education reformer Corey DeAngelis would call it. Arizona passed universal education savings accounts, giving all students, regardless of income, full control of their education dollars to go to the school that they need. So it's really going to be interesting to watch what happens out there in Arizona. But then just watching some of these, more democratic states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, states that are on the balance, on the margin, seeing what Democrats there do to, retake their edge and get some of those parent votes back.
All right. Again, we're talking with Peyton Lofton. He's a policy analyst at the News Center and also a Young Voices contributor. Peyton, where can people find examples of your writing, and where can they follow you on social media?
So you can find me on Twitter at Peyton_Lofton. There's not too many Peyton Loftons, so I'm easy to find. I've written in the Washington Examiner. I've written in Real Clear Policy. I've written in Chalkboard Review, all about education and the politics of school choice, which you'll be able to find on my Twitter.
Okay. I sure appreciate the hard work you're doing, and thank you so much for being our guest today.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Very happy to welcome Theo Burman. He is a Young Voices contributor checking in today from London, England. And Theo, first of all, tell us just a little bit about yourself. For the sake of people meeting you for the first time, tell us about the hats you wear.
Absolutely. So, my name's Theo. I've lived in London all my life. But I really, really like writing about America. And it's something that's quite important to me. My mother's from LA. And so growing up from across the pond, as it were, I've always had quite a big affinity for America and American politics. And even though I never really lived there, I always, followed it quite closely, which is why I feel so strongly about the issues that are facing both of these countries. And especially the special relationship. That's really important to me.
Well, I'm looking at an article you wrote for New York Daily News, and I got to tell you, I really like your take on this. The headline is, "The U.S. could learn a thing or two from British election brevity." And my first thought was, okay, you have my attention, because it seems like election season begins the second the election day is over. I mean, once the votes are counted, okay, we've declared a winner. The campaigning starts up anew. It's like it never really ends. But the leadership, or the election for leadership of Parliament for the Prime Minister, that seemed to come and go rather quickly. Now, was that just my imagination, or could the Brits teach us a thing or two about brevity when it comes to elections?
It wasn't just your imagination. It went really quickly. Obviously, being on this side of the Queen's death, everything seems like it happened ages ago. But yeah, like just a few weeks ago, we were still discussing, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and the Conservative Party are always a party that want to move very quickly, especially when there's been a lot of mistakes that they've made over the last few years. Their optics haven't been very good. They do want to, get their issues solved quickly. But even aside from that, I think there's something in the British culture that makes us want to get this kind of thing over and done with pretty quickly. We're not ones to beat around the bush with this kind of thing. And I think that helps a lot of people to kind of reclimatize and get back into the flow of things before the next election. Now,
this isn't the first election, though, that the Brits have decided rather quickly, right? I think you give some other examples of, there were other elections that also were decided in, just a matter of weeks, as opposed to month after month after month.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the most recent examples, the 2019 election and the 2017 election, happened in, 5 weeks, a really short amount of time compared to the election cycle you see in the United States. Even other previous leadership elections, for example, Theresa May, who took over from David Cameron after our Brexit referendum, that was solved in a matter of days, 11 days. That was helped by the fact that every other candidate running dropped out. There was and Theresa May won by default in the end. But it's definitely ingrained into the culture that we want to get it over and done with quickly.
You point out that something that's a real factor is voter fatigue, meaning the longer the election season drags on, or the election cycle drags on, the more the voters start to feel fatigue. Can you flesh that out for me and describe, when we talk about fatigue, I mean, does this mean that some of them get so tired they just put their hands up and say, you know what, I don't even care. I don't even want to participate?
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. It's just a matter of seeing all of the politics going on every day. It wears you down. And for a lot of people in countries where elections are coming so frequently, it really damages their ability to participate in politics. There's only so much energy you can devote to following and keeping up to date and informing yourself on all the issues to get to the point where you can make the decision properly. And I think a lot of people just check out. And this has a really big impact on voter turnout. I think for countries where the election cycle is a lot shorter, a lot more contained, you generally see higher turnouts. And in countries where the election cycle is particularly particularly long, like the United States, you see, slightly lower turnout. And I think it's a detriment to democracy when fewer people are voting. So anything we can do to encourage that, maybe by shortening our elections, I think is going to benefit us all and give us a more representative snapshot of what people are thinking.
Well, maybe it's because I'm experiencing some election fatigue myself. I am ready to learn. I'm ready for any advice you can give us, Theo. What could the U.S. learn from how Britain conducts its elections that would help us maintain integrity in our political system?
Yeah, so the main thing that I would propose is that the primary season really needs to be trimmed down. I think in the general, you want to give each state their chance to, have their moment in the sun. Each, individual community needs to be visited by the candidates. And for the national, I think that's fine. Each state is going to be voting. But the primary season is where the fat needs to be trimmed. It drags on for way longer than it has any right to. And the big problem is that because of that is each state will have its primary segmented. It will have one state or a collection of states, and then it'll be another 2 weeks, and then there'll be another state and that kind of thing. And obviously there'll be groups of states together. There'll be Super Tuesday and that kind of thing. But if we group them all together and said, okay, all the states need to have their elections in within even 1 month is, I think that's quite generous. I'd rather have it 1 week or even a day. But even shortening it by that, you can shave off half a year off of the election cycle. And I think that means people are going to stay engaged more. People are going to turn out more. And it also will get rid of front loading. And it means that the elections, the primaries that are further away from when the election starts won't be so affected by events early on in the campaign. By the time the last few states rolled around, a lot of candidates had dropped out, especially after, I think it was the North Carolina primary, a bunch of candidates dropped out. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, all dropped out and endorsed Biden. And if we lived in a world that had all the votes announced at one time rather than segmented, we could be looking at a very different presidency today.
When you mentioned that time frame too, this could save 6 months or better of political campaigning. I think about the incredible amount of money that's involved because, there's a lot of money being spent running ads and doing appearances and rallies and whatnot. I think there would be wiser use for that money other than just getting out there and, riling up the crowd. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, what would some of the issues be in terms of logistics? I know I want an easy fix, but at the same time, I'm willing to look at, okay, but what are the downsides of trying to have them closer together?
Yeah, obviously there are going to be some things that are rough around the edges. I think the main opposition would probably come from states like Iowa and New Hampshire. They've built a pretty strong culture around having the first states to announce the winners, and they like being those bellwether states. So there will probably be a lot of opposition from them. There's also going to be a lot of logistical things about lining up all of the states to announce things at the same time, on getting everything to happen within the same time frame. Candidates will want to be in different places, and there's going to be a pretty mad dash around the country to secure all of those states in time. But, I think we ask each state to announce things on roughly the same amount of time on the election day. So I think it's reasonable that we can ask them to do it at least in the same week or month early along in the cycle. So that obviously there would be a few logistical problems, but I think it's something that we could overcome if we really put our minds to it.
I would really love it if election officials and candidates here in the U.S. would consider what you're talking about here, just because to me, and maybe you see this too, it seems like the intensity of the election cycles is growing to the point where I'm a little bit worried about how intense people are about the 2022 midterm elections. I don't know if I want to see how worked up they're going to be in another 2 years, under this continual, politicking.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I don't even, live in the US, and I still feel the intensity from over here. I engage in this kind of thing a lot, but it gets incredibly stressful sometimes. And I can only imagine how concentrated the political ads and that kind of thing will be when you're actually over there. I visited America about a month ago, and it just struck me how nonstop all of the activism and the political engagement was. I think it must be really stressful for a lot of people. So hopefully, if that kind of thing is trimmed down a bit, then people will just be able to relax a bit more. We need to take some of the intensity out of politics.
Hear, hear. I'm with you on that. Again, we are talking with Theo Burman. He is a U.S.-UK dual citizen and journalist. He's a Young Voices contributor. Where can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Twitter. I'm Theo_Burman. That's at Theo_Burman. I'm also on Instagram, which is just Theo_Burman as well.
Okay. Theo,
that's me.
Thank you so much for being my guest today. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Cheers very much, Brian. It's lovely talking to you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to bring aboard Neetu Arnold. She is a Young Voices contributor as well as a senior research associate at the National Association of Scholars. And Neetu, there's probably a little bit more about you that, well, we'd all like to learn. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I do work in higher education policy, but I also enjoy playing music. I play the piano, and I also enjoy just exploring the city. I'm in the Philadelphia area right now, and as things open up, as the pandemic's over, it's just been nice to be able to explore the city more.
Very nice. Now, I'm looking at an article you wrote for the Spectator, spectator.org, actually. The title is Forgiving Student Loan Debt Doesn't Solve the Crisis, but Here's What Would. And I was like, okay, I really want to hear what you have to say, because I've heard a lot of talk about, the forgiveness of student loan debt. Some people are very happy about it. Some people are not so happy. Would you kind of summarize for me what is the crisis, just for those who aren't aware of why there's a student loan debt crisis? What does that crisis look like? And why does forgiving that debt fail to solve the crisis?
Yes. So currently, 45 million Americans hold $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. And for many of these Americans, they struggle to repay their loans. And so that's pretty much the student loan crisis. And at the heart of it is also the question of why higher education has become so expensive. It's nearly, I believe, doubled since 1980. And if you're looking at tuition and fees alone, it's tripled since 1980. So there is also the question of the cost of higher education. Now, what my article argues is that the Biden administration's plan to forgive student loans is not going to address this rising cost in higher education. In fact, it actually gives universities the incentive to increase their costs, and that's because they know students will turn to the federal student loan system to offset any increases in price. And now that there's been loan forgiveness, that door has been opened for future debt forgiveness. And so this really becomes a vicious cycle of students who are taking on more student loan debt or student loans, and universities increasing their price.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty logical progression that you're laying out there. Talk to me about what does this do in terms of, we're experiencing inflation at levels most of us probably haven't seen before in our lives. Maybe a few of us can remember gas lines and stuff when we were a kid, but how does this affect or impact inflation when we start, forgiving debt like this?
Yes, so I mentioned one effect, which would be it would increase the cost of college. But it's also going to make a lot of goods more expensive. We're in a very unique time right now where inflation is so high. We're also in a supply constrained society right now. And so when you have more people who have spending power because their debts are now forgiven, for many people, their debts have been forgiven, they can now spend that money elsewhere. And so when we have a supply constrained market, the price of the goods will increase. And so that's also going to contribute to inflation.
Wow. Well, I mean, good intentions and all, but, now I guess we're all learning a good lesson here, or will be learning a lesson in unintended consequences. Are there any voices of reason that have pushed back against the Biden administration on this?
Yes, I would say that the Republicans, it's not just Republicans, lawmakers against student loan forgiveness came up with an alternative bill called the Real Reforms Act. I would say it's more of a moderate proposal, and I wish that it was I think they could have gone further in some ways, but the idea was to push back against loan forgiveness. And one particular proposition that I liked was that it would restrict executive authority on making any changes to the student loan program if it resulted in increased costs. I think the problem here with loan forgiveness, particularly with the Biden administration's policy, is that the administration used executive authority rather than turning this decision over to Congress. And Congress members are elected by the people. So this was really wielding executive power to implement a policy that was not very popular. And we're going to have to contend with the student debt issue again, probably by 2028. That is an estimate by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So we want to make sure that we're not in this situation again. And not only does it have the effects of inflation, not only is it unfair, but again, it doesn't address why college has the price of college has increased so much.
Now, Neetu, you have laid out, I think, some really solid reasons why this forgiveness of student loan debt isn't going to solve the problem, but you also offer some, I think, very workable solutions. Let's talk a little bit about what lawmakers could do to address the student debt crisis.
Yes, so the Real Reforms Act, the part where they want to restrict executive authority here is one way to prevent future debt forgiveness. But we also want to prevent students from going into so much debt in the first place. And I think what's wrong with our current federal student loan lending system is that there's no checks or balances in place to determine who receives the loans and whether they can reasonably repay their student loans. And I think this is particularly a problem for borrowers who either enter majors which have very low return on investment, or they enter university with poor academic preparation. And that there are consequences for that. One of the consequences is just they will drop out, which means they have all of the debt, but none of the benefits of a college degree. And the second consequence could be that they enter college with one particular major in mind, one that could have been a good return on investment, but because they were unprepared, they switch to an easier major. And that easier major may be something that doesn't have a good return on investment, which brings us back to the problem that they're going to have issues repaying their student loans. And so I think what the kind of obvious solution here is to condition federal student loan lending onto a student's academic preparation, such as their SAT or ACT scores, and to also look at the potential expected earnings once they are out of college.
Is there any stomach for getting federally backed student loans, off the table entirely? In other words, getting the federal government out of the business of helping to make student loans possible. In other words, leaving them just up to banks who have to make a decision. Is this going to reflect favorably for our stakeholders or not?
Yes. So I'm not sure about that. I do know that there are people who support getting rid of the federal student aid system altogether, and I am one of those people as well. But I think reasonably, I don't think that's going to happen, at least in the next couple of years. And so this is one step to make sure that at least students are making more responsible decisions. Our federal funds are going to people who can repay their loans, who will enter fields where, as a society, we would benefit from their service there. So I think this is a more reasonable step to curbing a lot of the student loan debt we currently see.
Neetu, I like that you have laid out, I think, some workable solutions here. Lots of people are identifying the problem. You're one of the first people I've heard who's actually saying, but look, we could be doing this instead. One thing that stands out, though, and this comes through loud and clear in your article as well, is there's an inherent unfairness that comes into play when we start forgiving student loan debt like this. And I think you've touched on this briefly in your remarks, but for those who can't see, well, how could this possibly be unfair, to people? Why is it unfair to transfer the responsibility for that debt, to the taxpayers?
So a lot of education decisions are usually personal. So people may be going to college because they really like a certain school, even though it's not the most affordable option. For many people, they could be attending state universities. They could be going to community college first and then going to state school. And that could make education more affordable. But when students make the decision to go out of state for whatever personal reason, whether it's for their favorite football team or it's even for a specific major, that is a choice that is a private decision, but that is not something that the public should fund. I would also say that for many people, they try to avoid student loan debt just by the decisions that they make. And I think this sort of debt forgiveness is a slap in the face for the many people who made prudent decisions, who worked hard to pay off their debt.
No, I'm with you on that. 100%. I have a son who is just about to finish up his bachelor's degree, and I'm not sure exactly how he did it, but he has managed to work and to not take out student loans and has still managed to save up, a pretty significant amount of money while going to school. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. Neetu, tell people how they can find you on social media, where they can follow your work.
Yes, so you can follow my work at the National Association of Scholars website, which is nis.org. And you can also follow me on Twitter at NEETU_Arnold.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today. Happy to welcome David McGarry back to the program. David, I've been following you on Twitter. I know you are one busy individual. For those meeting you for the first time, would you care telling us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. So I am a Consumer Choice Fellow for Young Voices, and I've been doing a lot of work recently about privacy and tech policy.
Which it turns out is a pretty big topic on Capitol Hill. You and I were both talking about, it's been really warm. It's been a hot summer, and I'm sensing fall in the air. But as I sniff around, what is that antitrust I'm smelling? Because it sounds like there's some antitrust in the air in Washington D.C. What's going on that has the antitrust folks restless?
So the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, which, as many of your listeners may know, is supposedly, it's what they call it, an antitrust bill. This American Innovation Choice Online Act was supposed to come to a vote over the summer, and then it got bumped for other priorities like the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's back this fall, and we're thinking that it probably won't come to a head until after the midterms, but it is still very much in play. And the upside of or I should say, the proponents of the bill say that it's going to promote fair competition in online marketplaces like Amazon and with other platforms like Apple or Google. But it's actually just going to impose a huge amount of economic burdens on various players and really discourage innovation, really discourage the things that it says it's going to promote, which is innovation and choice online. And it's just an all-around terrible, it's a terrible option for consumers and for taxpayers and for voters. There's
a phrase you use in your article that I've not heard before, but it seems incredibly accurate at describing some of the dynamic that drives the process in Washington, D.C. these days, and that's grievance politics. Can you expand on what is meant by grievance politics?
Yeah, well, this is really important when it comes to American innovation and choice, because this bill is not just another antitrust bill in the way that most people typically think of the concept. For the Democrats, this is a part of a real reversion back to early 20th century progressive neo-Brandeisian big is bad antitrust gambits. As I say in the piece, when President Obama infamously said, "You didn't build that," the mantra has changed to "You must have stole that." And then on the right side of the aisle, Republicans are so angry with perceived censorship from big tech that they're just using the nearest weapon at hand to strike out at the people they see as their political enemies.
So would this act include some pretty serious reform to Section 230?
This act is focused on online marketplaces. So
okay.
this isn't, or I should say online marketplaces and platforms. So this isn't Section 230 as well. But
gotcha.
Ted Cruz has actually said something to the effect of, this is the best that we have to fight back against big tech censorship at the moment. So we're going to use it.
Wow. I mean, you point out some of the downsides of what this kind of bad policy can do. Talk to me about what will happen if this American Innovation and Choice Online Act is passed. What are the downsides of this type of policy?
Yeah, so as I said before, the new or I should say the behaviors that this act would newly make illegal are pretty wide ranging in terms of standard business practices like self-preferencing. But the true answer is that we don't fully know exactly all of the behaviors that this act is going to make illegal, because it hands a huge amount of power and a huge amount of discretion over to the FTC. Its language is very vague. It avoids terms that are typically used in antitrust and have acquired meaning over decades of use and litigation. And hands Lina Khan, who, as some of your listeners may know, is the chairwoman of the FCC and a self-described radical on these issues. It hands Lina Khan a huge amount of power to go after the businesses that she has been fighting against for her entire career.
Yeah, you give a couple of examples here, phrases like materially harm or materially restrict or impede. And I agree, those could be quite open to interpretation depending on, who's doing the interpreting.
Well, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't trust Amy Klobuchar or Lina Khan or Joe Biden to interpret these things.
No, in fact, I have to ask, and this is just the libertarian in me, wanting to know, is this much regulation necessary in the first place? I mean, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but frankly, I could use a lot less government in pretty much every area of my life. And something tells me that innovation might actually flourish if there was less of this kind of red tape that innovators had to work their way through in the first place.
I mean, that's a fantastic point. So one of the ways that that this bill is not entirely intellectually consistent is that it forbids what I referred to beforehand as self-preferencing on the part of large online platforms like Amazon. So what this means is that Amazon cannot use its status as a platform, as a marketplace, to promote its own products like Amazon Basics. Now, self-preferencing is something that happens all the time in markets, both online and offline. Just look at CVS, look at Costco. Look at even, a music store like Guitar Center or Sam Ash. These companies have their own products that they sell, and they use their retailer capacity to draw customer eyeballs to their own products. And this is actually something that's really important, because while we might think of CVS as an established pharmacy, it's an incumbent, it's a challenger in the drug market. So as we all know, buying generic drugs over the counter can really save the consumer a lot of money, and it forces Zyrtec, or it forces your Gaviscon, say, or any of your other name brand drug makers to really face some competition in that space.
Wow. Well, I love that you point out in the article, look, it's not just the Democrats that would be prone to abuse this kind of legislation. The Republicans, they're standing in line looking to do so too. I also give you high points, David, for a reference to Friedrich Hayek and making the case that these people who want to be the regulators or want to impose that regulation are suffering from what he called the knowledge problem. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the knowledge problem essay, because it's a really important economic point. So basically, the idea is that no single regulator or agency or even government can possess the adequate knowledge to plan an economy well, and that through prices, through all of the information that is bound up in prices, free markets tell consumers how to best and most effectively use scarce resources. And we have to remember that economics is really about scarcity, and that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And in the online space, things are so incredibly complicated, and things are so dynamic. Everything's moving so quickly, and so many people don't fully understand. How the technologies work and how the ecosystems work, and that goes for both private citizens and regulators. That even beyond the knowledge problem, which certainly holds true in every context, it's especially acute in online spaces.
Yeah, there's another phrase you use in here that again, I think is just so accurate, and that is you talk about how the situation only gets worse when politicians try to manifest their various culture war revenge fantasies. Wow, that is so on target. Well, thanks
for saying that. I mean, but I think it's completely true, because we as human beings, just innate in our human nature, is a desire to reverse engineer the outcomes that confirm our priors and help our priors. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a very bad thing. And it's important to recognize it so that we can keep it in check, both for ourselves and for our friends and our families, and ultimately up to our politicians and our elected leaders and the people who we rely on for information. Because as well-meaning as one can be, biases are still oftentimes hidden behind a wall, or a wall of reasoning and a wall of logic and sophistry. And in the case of Congress, that can have some really negative effects on the country and on consumers.
Well, I'm going to take your mention of Hayek as maybe a recommendation. People ought to pick up a copy of his book, or the Road to Serfdom, and they should understand what exactly is at stake here. David, where can people follow your work? You're a good informative source. Where can we find you?
Sure. So check me out on Twitter at David B. McGarry. Or you can also find me on the Young Voices page. You'll see my profile there. And you can also subscribe to my Substack newsletter, The Thoughtful Spot.
Which I've actually done, and I appreciate it every time it lands in my email inbox. David, thanks so much for being our guest today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Again, we're talking with David McGarry. He is a Consumer Choice Fellow with Young Voices. Thanks again for joining us.